unlimited access to the spa from now on. How could John keep this a secret? It's just evil, unforgivable. Without my knowledge, my in-laws' place had transformed into a luxury hotel. Now, I can enjoy the spa every day and indulge in delicious meals. But kidding aside, the thought of them using my precious son for their own desires, it's outrageous. They better be ready. My name is Amy, a 35-year-old office worker in the administrative department of a pharmacy. I live with my husband John and our first-grade son Edward. John and I met through a colleague at work, and from the moment we met, we clicked. We quickly became close, started dating, and were married the following year. With my upbeat husband John and lively son Edward, I was leading a life of ordinary happiness. Another thing that makes me glad I married John is having his mother-in-law Renda in our lives. Having lost my mother early, I was raised by my father. My mother-in-law, who I barely knew as a mother figure, treated me like her own daughter since the start of our marriage. Amy, do you have any plans this Sunday? Why don't you and Edward come over for dinner? She would say, always treating us to delicious meals. When Edward was younger, she was a great support for my parenting struggles, even helping to pick him up from daycare when I couldn't leave work. Edward grew very attached to her, and spending Christmas at my in-laws had become a tradition for our family. Amy, your mother-in-law really is the best, isn't she? My colleague Emma would say, listening with an envious look. It was Emma who introduced me to John. They had been friends since college. Emma, with her bright personality and many friends, joined the company with me. We were close enough to share work frustrations, family matters, and personal issues. The pharmacists and other staff were kind, and the company had excellent benefits. Emma and other colleagues with children continued to work full-time as before our pregnancies. Recently, John's been saying he has to work on weekends and isn't home even on his days off, I said, sounding a bit discontented. Are you suspecting him of cheating? Emma laughed. That's laughable. But it was true. John had been away from home more often. Dad, are you working again today? Edward asked, wanting to play with John. I have to work, sorry, John said apologetically. I couldn't say anything back, feeling proud of John for working hard for our family. Little did I know back then that such dedication would turn into such a terrible betrayal. Rock, paper, scissors. Oh, the worst, I sighed. My workplace is usually closed on Sundays and holidays, but about once a month, we're on duty for the hospital gate on Sundays. Accordingly, our pharmacy also opens. It seems Christmas is our turn this time. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would work. Unfortunately, I lost. I wanted to spend Christmas at my in-laws, but no choice. I have to do my best, I muttered to myself, only to be chuckled at by the friend sitting next to me. It's not funny, I said to her. She laughed and apologized. Sorry. This woman is also an officer, and we met at the daycare. Her son Henry and Edward are very close, and our families have become friends. We used to go on trips together, though we've been too busy lately. Her husband Tom is also a kind and gentle person. Her name is Isabella. I call her Henry's mom, or Isabella. By the way, Isabella, thanks for playing with Edward in the park last Sunday when I had to work. When John had to take care of Edward on weekends, today I played with Henry in the park, Edward told me. When I asked John about it, he said he ran into Henry and his parents at the park by chance and played together. Really? I asked John, but his vague response frustrated me. By the way, mother-in-law called and said she's looking forward to Christmas. I can't make it, but have fun. I can't go because of work, so it looks like Christmas will be without me this year, I told Isabella. Mother-in-law sounded very disappointed when I told her I couldn't come, but maybe I'll put John to work and have him do a thorough house cleaning. It's been a while, she said, sounding quite excited about the idea. Feel free to use him as much as you like, I laughed as I talked with mother-in-law. It was close to Christmas when this happened. I was working a late shift that day and had to do some unexpected overtime. I hurriedly tried to contact John but couldn't reach him. I ended up calling my son's mobile phone. Mom, are you done with work? Edward answered the phone with a cheerful voice, happy to hear from me. Sorry, Edward, Mom is working late. Can you put Dad on the phone? But Edward said John wasn't there. Wondering where they could be, I said, Hello, Amy. It must be tough working so late. John called and said he's going to be late because of work, mother-in-law said. Hello, Amy. It must be tough working so late. John called and said he's going to be late because of work, mother-in-law said. She told me that while she was preparing dinner in her house. John called her. Sorry, Mom. Amy's on a late shift and I should get home early, but I have to work overtime. Please help. After saying that, John hung up and couldn't be reached again. I was furious with John's actions. He hadn't contacted me at all, thinking maybe he wouldn't get caught. I rushed home. John still hadn't returned, and at the dinner table were mother-in-law and Edward, eating. Mother-in-law said she was happy to have dinner alone with her grandson. Even though I apologize, I really respect mother-in-law. John came home late that night. Hey, about work, you promised to take care of things when I have a late shift. Can you at least keep that promise? I said quietly, what can I do? It's work, I muttered to myself. John raised his voice and even suggested that I quit my job or become a part-timer. When John met me, he praised me for working in healthcare, but that John who said such nice things is no longer here. Our current lifestyle is also thanks to my income. Even though I'm an equal partner to John, he's been doing less housework lately and hasn't been taking care of Edward either. And this guy, hey, you're not cheating, are you? I looked at John with cold eyes. There's no way. You're overthinking, Amy. He suddenly changed his tone and put his arm around my shoulder. That said it all. John has always tried to appease me like this when he's lying or feeling guilty. How dare he cheat? He better be prepared. I was glad Edward was asleep. I didn't want to show our son such an ugly fight. From then on, we acted normal in front of Edward, but when it was just the two of us, we hardly talked or even made eye contact. When I told my colleague Emma about what happened, she said, "That guy is the worst. Let me know if you need anything." That was a cool thing to say. Days passed, and before I knew it, it was Christmas Eve. Take good care of Edward, will you? Say hello to Renda for me, I said to John, but as usual, he didn't even meet my eyes. I'm off then, he replied indifferently, and John and Edward left for my in-laws' house. What's with that attitude? It's so annoying, I thought to myself. I spent a lonely Christmas Eve alone in our eerily quiet house. There was no contact from John, but thinking he was having a good time with mother-in-law gave me a little peace of mind. I remembered mother-in-law saying she'd make John clean the house. I wondered if he was being worn out by chores and couldn't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude. Little did I know John was doing something unthinkable at that time. Christmas Day was busy with quite a few patients. Fortunately, I didn't have to work overtime, so I left work and went straight home. I planned to join my in-laws the next afternoon and spend the holiday with mother-in-law. Might as well enjoy some alone time for a change. As I was thinking this, my mobile phone rang. It was mother-in-law. Thinking it was going to be a complaint about John being lazy, I answered, "Amy, Merry Christmas. You must be tired from working on Christmas. You did great." Mother-in-law's voice sounded kind, not irritated at all. "Merry Christmas, Renda. I wish I could have spent it with you too. Is Edward just playing games?" When I asked, mother-in-law fell silent. Even after calling Renda's name a few times, there was no response. I wondered if it was a bad signal. "Amy, John and Edward didn't come here this year. I spent Christmas alone," mother-in-law finally said, and then began to sob over the phone. I was in a panic. John and Edward definitely left the house yesterday. Where could they possibly be now? There was a long silence between mother-in-law and me. "I'll head over to your place right now," I said. "It's about a 40-minute drive to my in-laws." On the way, my mind was filled with thoughts of Edward. What if they were involved in an accident or some incident? These worries spun in my head. When I arrived at my in-laws, mother-in-law was already waiting outside. As soon as she got into my car, I asked quietly, "Should we call the police?" Mother-in-law slowly shook her head. As I wondered why, mother-in-law began to speak. "Amy, I'm really sorry about my stupid son. Do you think John is having an affair?" Mother-in-law looked at me with teary eyes, and I almost started crying too. "What?" Actually, that's when I remembered something and hurriedly drove to a certain place. When we reached our destination, I called Edward's mobile phone. "Hello? Is Dad nearby?" I asked. "Yeah, he's here. Come quickly, Mom," Edward answered immediately. Even though we have been apart for only a day, Edward's voice sounded dear to me. "What is it, Amy?" "I'm busy right now." I heard John's voice on the phone, sounding like he wanted to end the call. Immediately, hearing that voice made me feel intense loathing, wanting to confront him. "Renda, you said something about making him clean, right? So, are you at your parents' house now?" John's response on the phone was calm. "Yeah, That's right, Amy. I can't wait to see you. When did he become so adept at lying as easily as breathing? I thought to myself, should I have quit my job? Should I have tried harder at home? But none of that justifies an affair. Oh, Sorenda, you started a luxury hotel. Does that mean unlimited spa access? How could John keep this a secret? I won't forgive him, I said in a low tone filled with hatred. On the phone, John seemed quite flustered by my accusation. His silence prompted me to continue. Hey, come out of the room. This is the luxury hotel I always wanted to visit. You said it was too expensive, remember? As I spoke fluently, John seemed to give up. I'm sorry, he said in a barely audible voice. I found this place using the GPS on Edward's mobile phone. This hotel, not far from my in-laws, was the place I wanted to visit. The fact that John, who said it was too expensive for me, was enjoying himself here with his mistress infuriated me. Perhaps it showed on my face because on the way to the hotel, mother-in-law kept apologizing. It was then that I found out for the first time that when I worked late shifts, mother-in-law was almost always the one taking care of Edward. I hadn't noticed because she would return home before I got back. John, who was terrible at cooking, used to buy ready-made food, and if mother-in-law tried to cook, he stubbornly refused her. Looking back, that must have been a strategy to keep me from finding out. Even during that short time, John was so enthralled with his mistress. Mother-in-law initially believed John was really working, but as his absences increased, her suspicions of an affair naturally grew. The climax was when mother-in-law saw John walking arm in arm with an unknown woman, looking intimate. She debated whether to consult me but decided against it. The main reason was that she didn't want to lose the chance to see Amy and Edward. Mother-in-law sobbed in the passenger seat, knowing she cared so much for us. Tears streamed down my cheeks too. Mother-in-law was more considerate of me and Edward than John ever was. This time, John had contacted her, saying he would spend some rare time alone with Edward, but asked her to cover for him, saying he'd be at her house. Mother-in-law, suspecting a lie, worried about Edward and contacted me. I despised John from the bottom of my heart for involving so many people, I thought bitterly. At the hotel, after explaining the situation, we were made to wait in the lobby. Then, a man and a woman with guilty expressions on their faces emerged, along with Mom. I was getting bored. I played a law with Henry, who was Edward's friend from daycare. Henry looked around and said, "Looks like my dad hasn't arrived yet." He seemed a bit disappointed. John's mistress was Isabella, another mom from the daycare. I wasn't sure how long the affair had been going on, but these two fools had boldly involved our children. Apparently, they had told their sons that their respective parents would join them later. How despicable. John had booked 2 rooms, one for the children and the other for themselves. So repulsive. Thanks to the hotel's kindness, mother-in-law and I were allowed to stay in a room for a while, where she looked after the children in the other room. Isabella having an affair with my husband and then talking to me normally at committee meetings was unbelievable. I spoke in a calm tone. What I thought Amy hadn't noticed anything. It was so funny. Isabella laughed. What is this woman? I never would have guessed that Isabella, who seemed so fragile and beautiful, was actually this spiteful. I stared at her quietly, pondering the unpredictability of people. John himself seemed a bit taken aback by Isabella's true nature. This woman, without being asked, happily began to talk about how and when she started her affair with John. Their relationship began when our children were in senior kindergarten. On a day I was sick and couldn't attend a parent meeting, so I asked John to go in my place. It was Isabella who made the first move. We had known each other as families and had each other's contact information. From that day on, they began to communicate more frequently. It started with complaints about their spouses but gradually turned into personal conversations. Soon, they began meeting more often, and it didn't take long for their relationship to become romantic. But now it's all over. What a pity, Isabella chuckled, her nonchalant attitude heard loud and clear. I said, "You seem quite relaxed for someone about to face serious consequences." Ignoring her surprised look, I stood up decisively, facing my bewildered husband. I said, "Come on, get up and check out. I've called a ride for you, so get ready quickly," I said with a slight smile as I left the room. Seeing Isabella's face twitch a bit from my remark felt oddly satisfying. Now begins the hellish drive. The trip isn't over until we're home, I thought to myself. After checking out, as we headed to the parking lot, Henry ran joyfully towards the person he was waiting for. Henry's dad, Tom, Isabella's husband. Sorry to keep you waiting, Henry. Have you been good? Tom said in his usual calm manner. Dad, can Edward and I go home first? Mom and you need to talk, Henry said gently, and the two boys happily got into my car. Thank you. We'll have a long talk on the way home, I said, glaring at Isabella. I had learned from contacting Tom that he was supposedly at work and Isabella had lied about visiting her parents far away to come here. Both of them were utterly despicable. I was forced to come here because John threatened to use Edward to ostracize Henry at school if I didn't. Isabella started with a shallow lie. Really? You seemed so eager to tell me everything just a while ago. I continued calmly. Isabella laughed. What is this woman? I thought, staring at her quietly, pondering the unpredictability of people. John himself seemed taken aback by Isabella's true nature. She happily began to talk about how and when she started her affair with John, and it was unbelievable to hear. Their relationship began when our children were in senior kindergarten. On a day I was sick and couldn't attend a parent meeting, so I asked John to go in my place. It was Isabella who made the first move. We had known each other as families and had each other's contact information. From that day on, they began to communicate more frequently. It started with complaints about their spouses but gradually turned into personal conversations. Soon, they began meeting more often, and it didn't take long for their relationship to become romantic. But now it's all over. What a pity, Isabella chuckled with a nonchalant attitude. I said, you seem quite relaxed for someone about to face serious consequences. I ignored her surprised look, standing up decisively, facing my bewildered husband. I placed the voice recorder with our earlier conversation in Tom's hand as Isabella desperately tried to grab it. Don't bother. I have another copy just for myself, I said, smiling as I got into my car. As I drove away, John's pathetic voice called out from behind, Wait, what am I supposed to do now? Go home alone. Oh, but I thought you might feel lonely, so I arranged a ride for you too. I pointed behind John. Behind him stood my colleague Emma and her husband, who was also a friend from college. Apparently, John owed him a big favor and couldn't stand up to him. I glanced over and saw they were already scolding him. Emma gave me a look that said, Leave it to me. Though my husband was a disappointment, I was lucky to have supportive people around me. As I expected, everyone's ride home was hellish. Isabella desperately denied her relationship with John in the car, but no one believed her with the voice recorder playing. Eventually, she admitted to having other affairs. I don't know if John was serious, but he was the one being played from the start. The reason Isabella targeted John was so petty because Edward got the lead role in a school play over Henry. I was furious. I planned to make him pay a hefty alimony. Henry's custody went to Tom, of course. He said he was going back to his parents' place, a bit far away. John came home late that night, looking like a ghost. It seems like he got a good scolding from Emma and her husband. John always said his college friends were very important to him, as if it were a mantra from the beginning of our marriage. Now, because of this incident, John probably won't be invited to their gatherings anymore. It's nothing but karma. He brought this upon himself. He should regret it. What angered me the most was that every time he met his mistress, John told Edward, Today it's a secret between us men, okay? Don't tell Mom. Edward kept that promise and never told me anything. When I found out, I was moved to tears. John and I successfully finalized our divorce. You stupid man, how can you face your late father now? Don't ever show your face again, mother-in-law said, slapping him. John finally realized the gravity of his actions and cried like a child. But my heart didn't waver. Afterward, John requested a transfer to a branch outside the prefecture. He paid the alimony and is keeping up with child support. As for me and Edward, we're living with mother-in-law at her place. I considered returning to my parents' home, but my father has remarried and has a new family. Living together would be impossible. Mother-in-law suggested we stay with her until our lives stabilize. People are often surprised by our unique relationship. But I still cherish mother-in-law like my real mother. I hesitated about what to call her, but I still call her Renda. We're keeping it a secret, but we plan to celebrate her 60th birthday at that hotel. I splurged and booked the most expensive room. This should turn the unpleasant memories into enjoyable ones. My job became far, and Edward had to transfer schools, but Tom's parents lived near our former in-laws, so the boys ended up in the same school again. That was a surprise. Once things settle down, I might rent an apartment near work. But for now, I want to cherish this time a little longer.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.